Well, this is JC one more time. I was going to wait a little while to write chapter 12 of my book called Todd, but doggone it, I'm kind of wondering about what's going to happen too. Frankly, I don't know any more about it right at this point than anybody else does. I kind of make it up as I go along. So, anyhow, I couldn't help myself. I had to go ahead and write it. And I said it was going to be a lot less emotional and personal and such as that, and it is somewhat, but it's still a little bit emotional. So maybe this will be the last chapter in the soap opera series, so to speak, of Todd. And after this, well, I'll settle him down somewhere, and we'll get down to the business of just making a living and such as that. But right now, this is chapter 12 of my book that I call Todd. After the Foleys learned about Todd, they seemed to relax. Todd's demeanor was such that wouldn't make anybody around him feel ill at ease. The Foleys, especially Mr. Foley, had accepted his daughter's decision, knowing full well that once a decision is made, there's usually little to gain by objecting very much. Besides, he decided he kind of liked this young man. In a way, he even felt somewhat relieved that she had chosen for herself such a boy as Todd, considering some of the other boys he had seen. Mr. Foley wondered aloud if, when Todd was younger, his parents had ever considered placing him into some advanced school for gifted children. Todd said they hadn't. He couldn't ever recall the subject ever coming up. Soon the Foleys said their goodbyes and left. Leslie stayed behind with Todd. When they were alone, they exchanged hugs and kisses, and Leslie whispered, "You know, it'll be hard for you to be good for 2.5 years, don't you?" With a big smile, Todd said with a wink, "You know, I can order myself to not think about it at all." "Sure you can," laughed Les. "I doubt that very much." And they had a big laugh about that. This day, both a sad and a wonderful day, finally came to an end, and Todd took Leslie home and went to Aunt Lola's house to get his mother. Aunt Lola wanted her to stay, saying it might be too sad for her to be at home right now. But Betsy assured her it would be all right with Todd there, too. Todd and his mother got home in a short time, and Todd parked the car at the curb. He had cleaned the desk and the den of the blood and other signs of what had happened there, and the residue was in a leaf bag on the garbage floor. He didn't want his mother to see it, not even in the bag, ever. The next day, Todd went with his mother to his father's hardware store. Because the graveside service would not be for another week, the funeral director would let Todd know for sure. Todd had time to start learning about the hardware business. They got to the store early, an hour before opening time, so Todd could familiarize himself with the store and the stock. Betsy checked the cash register, counting the money and checking it against the cash receipts, credit card slips, and checks, while Todd walked around the store to see how it was laid out, which product was placed at the front of the displays, and which was obviously a slow seller. Then he went into the back and checked the stock. He could see that his father had been very effective in ordering whatever was in demand at whatever the time of the year. He had been a very astute businessman, and this store was an extremely successful business. Todd found himself admiring his father very much for his business talent. The doors were opened at 7 a.m. sharp. There were already several people waiting to get in. Betsy told Todd to watch her and wait on the first few customers before he went on his own. She walked to the checkout with her first customer, a man who had gotten 4 pounds of 16-penny nails. She had only to weigh them on the special scales because the man was a regular customer and already knew where they were. She rang him up and asked, "Do you want these to go on your account?" He said he did, and he said, "I'm sorry to hear about Mr. Daniels." Betsy acknowledged his offer of sympathy with a small nod of her head. Then she made out a sales slip and gave him a copy and put a copy under the tray in the register. The man touched the brim of his hat in a small goodbye salute and left. Todd watched this and smiled at his mother. "Pretty cool, Mom," he grinned. And he said that was nice of him. "Yes, it was," she said. Then she added, "This is all old hat for me, but it's nice to be back." Soon Todd was doing everything by himself. He asked a few obvious questions of his mother, but for the most part he did well on his own. After today, the hardware store would be, quote, old hat, end quote, for Todd, too. That night they discussed the store and the amount of business it did. Todd looked at the books briefly, able to understand all of the entries and figures. "This has been a very successful business, hasn't it?" he asked. "I never realized how busy you and Dad have been with the store." Betsy replied, "Yes, it has been very good to us. Your father did most of the work, of course. I mostly clerked and kept books, especially just before you were born. I kept books." She winked and grinned at her son. "You were quite a load," she said. "Too much for me to lug around in that store all day." Todd laughed out loud, and Betsy did too. "My gosh," he said, 14 pounds at birth. That was a load." She said, "I promised I'd never do that again." Todd said, "I know, I heard you," and they both laughed again. Betsy stopped laughing then and looked at her son. He knew what she was about to say, but he let her say it. Her chin trembled just a little, and a tear slipped down her cheek. She reached over and took his hand. "My God, son," she said, "this is the first time we've ever laughed together. I can't believe it. It took losing my Bobby to make me enjoy my son. I must be the retarded one here." "It's okay, Mom," Todd said. "Sometimes things are strange, sometimes more than we can understand. But don't be sad about me. You did a wonderful job of raising me, of taking care of me up to now. And now it's my turn to take care of you." A week later, the graveside service was held. Aunt Lola came, and several of Bobby's closest friends came. The man who had bought nails at the store was one. A few other people came, some Betsy knew and a few she didn't. The Foleys came. Leslie insisted on it, but they would have come anyhow. A minister friend said words over Bobby's grave, saying what a good God-fearing man Mr. Daniels had been, and allowing us to how he knew God would forgive this good man for whatever sin he may have committed. He said, "May your soul find peace, our dear friend. Amen." Betsy was surprised when the customer from the store asked if he could say a few words. "A eulogy of sorts," he said. She wondered about his request, but said it would be all right. "Well, I won't say my name here. It don't matter. I just want you all to know what a good man Mr. Daniels really was. I never knew his wife or his son, not in person anyways, but I learned all about him from Mr. Daniels, Bobby you call him. I met him right after he opened his hardware store. I was young and building my first house, trying to turn myself into a building contractor. I went into the store and got a bunch of stuff, hammers and nails and sawhorses, a whole bunch of building supplies. When I got to check it out, I didn't have enough money to pay for it all. Well, I started to take the sawhorses back, but Mr. Daniels said not to. He said I looked like an honest man, and if I agreed to buy all my supplies from him, he'd just start me up a charging account. I could pay him when I could. It wasn't until then that he asked me my name. I told him, and he reached across the counter and grabbed my hand and gave it a big shake. I remember wondering, is this guy nuts? He's giving credit to some guy you don't even know his name, the first time he ever saw him. Well, I'm the biggest building contractor in the county now, and I owe most of it to Mr. Daniels. More than once in the beginning, he carried me for stuff. Most of it he never even wrote down. He just remembered in his head, but he always gave me a receipt for the exact amount when I came in to pay it. But that ain't all. He asked me one time, right after his son was born, if I had any kids. I told him I did, a boy and a girl. He looked at me sort of funny, and I asked him what was wrong. I told him I was a damn good listener. He told me that his son had some special kind of deal, a sort of problem of some kind, and he guessed it was. Well, I had a six-pack in the pickup, and I asked him if he wanted to share a couple with me later and we could talk. He said yes, he would. That sounded like a good idea, if I wouldn't mind. Well, I come back after he closed. His wife was home, so he called her and said he had to do some checking about the stock, about the windows or something. Anyhow, we drove to the park and talked. Now, I ain't going to say here what it was about, but afterwards he thanked me for listening, He said he never could talk much to anybody except his big brother, Carl something or other. Well, Carl Daniels, too, I guess it would be. Yeah, his big brother, Carl Daniels. Through the years after that, he always come to me when he was worried about his kid or something. He called me his confidant or something like that. I never met his family, but I probably know him as well as anybody does. Then a while back, he stopped talking to me. I asked him what was wrong, but he never would say. I wish now I had made him tell me. Maybe we wouldn't be here now like this. Anyways, I just want to say Mr. Daniels was the best man I ever knew, best friend I ever had, and I'm sorry as hell that all this had to happen. Then he nodded to Betsy and Todd and touched the brim of his hat in a small salute. Then he placed a single flower on Mr. Daniels' casket, and he turned around and walked away. Now, this is the end of chapter 12 of Todd. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll be back pretty soon to do chapter 13. So thank you very much. This is JC.